He lived in a rusted shack with a leaking roof, shared one meal a day with his grandmother, and wore the same 2 shirts all year long. He owned a penthouse in Manhattan, a vacation home in Malibu, and had more money than most countries. But when his $200,000 car broke down on a dirt road in rural Alabama, a 13-year-old boy fixed it with just $2 worth of parts. How did a kid who learned everything from thrown-away books outsmart a team of professional engineers? Stay with me, because this story will change the way you see talent, poverty, and what it truly means to invest in people. This is the story of Jalen, a boy who proved that genius does not need a classroom, it just needs a chance. It was a hot Saturday afternoon in the summer, the kind of afternoon where the heat rose off the ground in waves you could actually see. The air sat heavy and still thick with humidity, like breathing through a warm towel. Somewhere in the deep rural stretch of Macon County, Alabama, a narrow dirt road cut through fields of dry grass and pine trees that had been standing longer than anyone could remember. The road had no name, not officially. People around here just called it the back road. It ran about 4 miles from the county highway down to a small cluster of homes that most maps had forgotten about. The town, if you could even call it a town, was called Tillman. Population? Maybe 200. Maybe less. Nobody had counted in a long time. If you drove down that dirt road, the first thing you would notice was the dust. Red Alabama clay dust that covered everything. It covered the mailboxes. It covered the porches. It covered the windshields of old pickup trucks that sat in front yards with flat tires and dead batteries, trucks that had not moved in months, maybe years. The second thing you would notice was the quiet. No traffic, no sirens, no construction, just the hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere in the distance. Tillman had one general store, just one. It was a small wooden building with a tin roof and a Coca-Cola sign out front that had faded so badly you could barely read it. Inside the shelves were half empty. The owner, an old man everybody called Mr. Hank, kept the place running more out of stubbornness than profit. He sold canned beans, white bread, bags of rice, and cheap cigarettes. If you needed anything else, you drove 45 minutes to the nearest Walmart. If you had a car that worked, there used to be more here. 10 years ago, there was a small textile factory on the edge of town that employed almost half the people in Tillman. It paid minimum wage, but it was steady work. Then the factory closed, moved overseas, just like that. The jobs disappeared overnight. The younger folks packed up and left, headed to Birmingham, Atlanta, anywhere that had work. The ones who stayed behind were mostly the elderly and the children. Grandparents raising grandchildren because the parents had gone looking for something better and never came back. The nearest school was 22 miles away. The bus came every morning at 6:15, rain or shine, and brought the kids back by 4 in the afternoon. But the school itself was struggling. Overcrowded classrooms, outdated textbooks, no science lab, no computer room. In cities like New York or San Francisco, kids were learning to code before they could drive. In Tillman, kids were lucky if they had a working calculator. That was the thing about places like this. They were not poor because the people were lazy. They were poor because the opportunities had packed up and left just like the factory. The talent was still here. The hunger to learn was still here. But the doors were closed. And when every door around you is closed, you start to believe that maybe the world was not built for people like you. The houses in Tillman were small. Most of them were old wooden structures painted white or blue a long time ago, but the paint had cracked and peeled so much that the bare wood showed through like scars. Porches sagged in the middle. Screen doors hung crooked on their hinges. Yards were patches of dirt and crabgrass bordered by chain-link fences that leaned at angles. But there was something else about Tillman that outsiders never saw. There was pride here, quiet pride. The kind that showed up in the way Miss Della kept her front porch swept clean every single morning, even though no one ever visited. The kind that showed up in the way Mr. Hank still opened his store at 7 a.m. Sharp even on days when he knew he would not sell more than $10 worth of goods. The kind that showed up in the way grandmothers ironed their grandchildren's school clothes the night before, pressing the creases sharp because looking neat was one thing poverty could not take away from you. Tillman was forgotten, but it was not empty. There was life here. Stubborn, quiet, dignified life. And in this forgotten village behind a crumbling house, at the very end of the back road, there was a small, rusted tin shed. The shed leaned slightly to one side like it was tired of standing. Its walls were patched with scrap metal and old license plates. A piece of blue tarp covered a hole in the roof. Inside that shed, something extraordinary was happening, and no one in the world knew about it yet. The shed belonged to a boy named Jalen Tate, 13 years old, small for his age with narrow shoulders and long fingers that always seemed to be reaching for something. His skin was dark brown smooth, except for a small scar on his left forearm where he had burned himself on a hot exhaust pipe 2 summers ago. He wore the same rotation of clothes every week. 2 t-shirts, 1 pair of jeans, 1 pair of shorts. His sneakers had holes near the toes, and he had stuffed them with newspaper to keep the rocks out. But his hands told a different story. They were the hands of someone who worked, calloused at the fingertips. Nails short and stained with grease that no amount of soap could fully remove. There was always a faint smell of motor oil on him like it had seeped into his skin and become part of who he was. Right now, Jalen was sitting on an overturned milk crate inside the shed bent over a small electric fan that had stopped working 3 days ago. The fan belonged to his grandmother. It was the only fan in the house, and in Alabama summer heat, that fan was not a luxury. It was survival. Jalen held a screwdriver in his right hand and a pair of needle-nose pliers in his left. He had already removed the back cover and the blade assembly. Now he was studying the motor, turning it slowly, examining the wiring with the focus of a surgeon looking at an X-ray. He found it. A small cylindrical piece attached to the motor by 2 thin wires. One of the wires had come loose. The piece was called a capacitor. It was the part that gave the motor the initial jolt of energy it needed to start spinning. Without it, the motor just sat there. It had the power, it had the wiring, but it could not start, like a runner at the starting line who never hears the gunshot. Jalen knew this because he had read about it. Not in a classroom. He had never had a teacher explain how a motor worked. He had learned it from a book he found in a box outside the public library in town. The library had been cleaning out old donations, and someone had tossed a stack of books into a cardboard box by the dumpster. Most of them were romance novels and outdated travel guides. But buried at the bottom, Jalen found a thick paperback with a torn cover. Auto Repair for Dummies. He took it home and read it cover to cover. Twice. That book was now taped together with duct tape and sitting on a shelf inside the shed, right next to a water-stained copy of Basic Electrical Circuits and a library book on small engine maintenance that was 3 years overdue. The walls of the shed were covered in pencil drawings. Not art. Diagrams. Engine diagrams. Wiring diagrams. A 4-stroke engine cycle drawn in 4 panels, each one labeled in Jalen's careful handwriting. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Next to it, a diagram of a basic alternator with arrows showing the direction of current flow. On the wooden shelves that Jalen had built himself from scrap lumber parts were organized with a neatness that would have surprised anyone who saw the outside of the shed. Bolts in one jar, nuts in another, washers sorted by size, spark plugs, some used, some still good. A collection of wires, connectors, fuses, and switches all salvaged from broken appliances and dead cars that people in Tillman had thrown away. To anyone else, it was junk. To Jalen, it was a library. Jalen. A voice called from the house. Strong. Sharp. The kind of voice that had been calling children inside for decades and was not about to be ignored. Yes, ma'am, Jalen called back without looking up. Dinner's ready. Come wash your hands. 5 more minutes, Grandma. I almost got it. You said 5 more minutes 20 minutes ago. Get in here before this food gets cold. You cannot eat engine parts, Jalen. Jalen smiled to himself. He carefully reconnected the loose wire to the capacitor, twisted it tight with the pliers, and gave it a gentle tug to make sure it held. Then he plugged the fan into the extension cord that ran from the house. He pressed the button. The fan hummed to life. The blades spun slowly at first, then picked up speed until they were whirring smoothly, pushing warm air around the shed. Jalen sat back on his milk crate and watched the fan spin for a moment. A small, quiet smile spread across his face. Not a proud smile, not a boastful one, just the smile of someone who had figured something out. Someone who had solved a puzzle that the world never even asked him to solve. Jalen did not know the word engineer, but that is exactly what he was. He unplugged the fan, picked it up carefully, and carried it inside. His grandmother was standing at the stove. Her name was Opal Tate. She was 67 years old, a small woman with silver hair pulled back tight and reading glasses that always sat low on her nose. She wore a faded house dress and slippers that whispered against the kitchen floor as she moved. Her hands were strong and worn the hands of a woman who had spent her life working, sewing, cooking, cleaning, holding things together when everything around her was falling apart. "Fan's fixed," Jalen said, setting it down on the kitchen table. Opal looked at the fan, then at Jalen, then back at the fan. She shook her head slowly, but there was a warmth in her eyes that she could not hide. Sit down and eat your beans." Jalen sat down. He bowed his head while his grandmother said grace. Then they ate together in the small kitchen, the fixed fan humming quietly on the counter between them. That was their life. Simple, tight, held together by routine and love, and very little money. But Jalen was happy in that shed, happier than he was anywhere else in the world. Because in that shed, he was not the quiet kid with the second-hand clothes. He was not the boy without parents. He was not poor. In that shed, he was someone who could make broken things work again. And in a world that had given him so little that felt like everything. Now, miles away from Tillman on a smooth 4-lane highway just outside Birmingham, a very different world was moving at 70 miles per hour. Inside a black Mercedes AMG GLE, the air conditioning hummed at exactly 68 degrees. Soft jazz played through 12 speakers. The leather seats were cool and firm. The dashboard glowed with blue light, and a small screen showed a map with a blue line stretching from a rural area south of Montgomery all the way to the Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport. Behind the wheel sat a man named Wendell Hayes, 45 years old, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven. His skin was deep brown, and his hair was cut close and neat with just the first touches of gray at the temples. He wore a white dress shirt that cost $400. The collar unbuttoned the sleeves, still crisp even after a long day. On his left wrist, a Patek Philippe watch caught the afternoon light every time he moved his hand. Wendell's right hand rested on the steering wheel. His left hand tapped against his thigh in a slow, restless rhythm. Not to the music, to something else. Something in his mind that would not settle. His phone sat in the center console, and a voicemail was playing through the car speakers. "Mr. Hayes, this is Denise. Just confirming your board meeting Monday at 9 a.m. The Osaka team wants to move the call to Tuesday. Also, the Alabama site visit report is ready for your review. Have a safe flight, sir." Wendell reached over and tapped the phone to stop the message. He had already listened to it twice. He did not need to hear it a third time. Wendell Hayes was the founder and CEO of Hayes Technologies, a clean energy company based in New York City. The company designed and built solar panel systems for commercial buildings, government facilities, and more recently, rural communities. In 15 years, Wendell had grown it from a 2-person startup in a Brooklyn apartment into a billion-dollar enterprise with offices in 4 countries. Forbes had written about him. CNN had interviewed him. He had shaken hands with senators and sat across the table from foreign ministers. He was successful. By every measure, the world used Wendell Hayes had made it. But there was something people did not know about Wendell, something he rarely talked about and never put in interviews. He had grown up poor. Not uncomfortable poor, not tight-budget poor, real poor, Southside Chicago poor. The kind of poor where dinner was sometimes a sleeve of saltine crackers and a glass of water. The kind of poor where your winter coat came from a church donation bin and you hoped it fit. Wendell had clawed his way out. Scholarships, Night classes, 70-hour work weeks. He had built everything he had with his own hands and his own mind. And somewhere along the way he had left that world so far behind that he could barely remember what it felt like. Today, Wendell was driving back from a site visit in rural Alabama. His company was exploring locations for a new solar installation project, a pilot program to bring affordable energy to underserved communities. He had spent the morning walking a plot of land near Macon County, talking to local officials, reviewing soil reports. It was the kind of work he used to do himself in the early days. Lately, he sent teams to do it. But something had pulled him down here personally. Maybe curiosity, maybe restlessness. He was not sure. Now he was heading to the airport for a 7 p.m. flight back to New York. His GPS had suggested a shortcut through the back roads to save 20 minutes. Wendell had taken it without thinking. He glanced at the map on his screen. The blue line cut through an area with no town names, no gas stations, no markers of any kind, just a thin road winding through trees and open fields. Wendell turned the Jazz up slightly and pressed the accelerator. He wanted to get to the airport, get on the plane, and get home. Wendell Hayes had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. But in the next 30 minutes, a 13-year-old boy in a dusty shed would teach him something no business school ever could. The GPS said 17 minutes to the highway. Wendell was making good time. The dirt road was rough, full of ruts and loose gravel, but the Mercedes handled it well enough. The suspension absorbed most of the bumps. The air conditioning kept the cabin cool. Through the tinted windows, the Alabama countryside rolled by in shades of brown and green. Then it happened. A small jolt, barely noticeable, like the car had hiccuped. Wendell frowned but kept driving. Probably just a pothole. But then it happened again, harder this time. The steering wheel vibrated under his hands. The engine made a sound that did not belong, a low, rough grinding, like something metal was chewing on itself deep inside the machine. Wendell sat up straighter. He eased off the accelerator and listened. The grinding stopped. For a second, everything seemed fine. Then the dashboard lit up. Not one warning light, all of them. Check engine, battery, oil pressure, transmission. They flickered on and off like a string of Christmas lights losing power. "What the?" Wendell muttered. He pressed the gas pedal gently. The car lurched forward, then hesitated. The engine stuttered. The RPM needle jumped up, dropped to 0, jumped again. The car was fighting itself. No, 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 no. Wendell gripped the wheel with both hands. He pressed the accelerator again. Nothing. The engine coughed once, twice, and then went completely silent. The dashboard went dark. The air conditioning stopped. The Jazz stopped. Everything stopped. The Mercedes rolled forward on its own momentum, slower and slower, until it came to a quiet stop on the side of the dirt road. Silence. Wendell sat there for a moment, both hands still on the wheel, staring straight ahead. The only sound was the ticking of the engine cooling down and the buzz of insects outside. He turned the key. Nothing. Not even a click. He turned it again. Same thing. The car was completely dead. $200,000 of German engineering, and it sat there on a dirt road in rural Alabama like a very expensive paperweight. Here is something most people do not know about modern luxury vehicles. They are built like computers on wheels. Every system in the car, from the engine to the brakes to the steering, is controlled by dozens of electronic sensors that talk to a central computer. When everything works, it is seamless, beautiful even. But when one sensor fails, especially in harsh conditions like extreme heat or heavy dust, it can send a bad signal to the computer. And the computer does what computers do. It panics. It shuts everything down to protect the engine. One tiny sensor, smaller than your thumb. That is all it takes to turn a $200,000 machine into a piece of metal that will not move. Wendell did not know any of this. He just knew his car was dead. He pulled out his phone. No signal, not one bar. He held the phone up toward the windshield. Nothing. He opened the door and stepped outside, holding the phone above his head, like people do when they are desperate. Still nothing. He tried calling roadside assistance. Call failed. He tried his assistant Denise. Call failed. He tried 911. Call failed. "You have got to be kidding me," Wendell said out loud. He looked around. The road stretched in both directions, empty and still. No houses, no power lines, no other cars, just red dirt, dry grass, and pine trees standing like silent witnesses. The sun was directly overhead now, and the heat was brutal. The kind of heat that sits on your shoulders and pushes down. Within 2 minutes of standing outside, Wendell felt sweat sliding down his back, soaking through his $400 shirt. He walked to the front of the car and popped the hood. The engine stared back at him, a maze of metal, plastic covers, wires, and hoses. He had no idea what he was looking at. He reached in and touched a hose. It was hot. He pulled his hand back. He poked at a few wires. Nothing happened. He stared at the engine for a long time, as if staring hard enough might reveal the problem. It did not. Wendell Hayes had built a company worth $3 billion. He had negotiated contracts with some of the most powerful people on the planet. He had stood on stages in front of thousands and spoken without a single note. But standing in front of this engine on this empty road in this heat, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time: helpless. He loosened his collar. Then he pulled off his watch and dropped it into his pocket. Then he rolled his sleeves up past his elbows. The layers of wealth were coming off one piece at a time, and underneath was just a man, standing in the sun, stuck. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then 40. Wendell leaned against the side of the car, arms crossed, jaw tight. His shirt was damp with sweat. His shoes were covered in red dust. His phone sat on the roof of the car, useless. He had checked it every 2 minutes for the past half hour. Still no signal. For the first time in years, Wendell Hayes could not solve a problem by making a call, writing a check, or giving an order. Money meant nothing out here. Power meant nothing. His name meant nothing. He was just a man with a broken car on a road that nobody used. Then from the far end of the dirt road he saw something, a small figure, walking toward him. The figure was small. That was the first thing Wendell noticed. Small and slow, moving through the heat shimmer that rose from the road like a ghost. As the figure got closer, Wendell could see it was a boy, a kid, 13, maybe 14 years old. The boy wore a faded gray t-shirt that was at least 2 sizes too big for him. His jeans were old, the knees worn thin and pale. On his feet were a pair of rubber slides, the kind you could buy at a dollar store, worn down flat on the soles. He carried a plastic grocery bag in one hand. His arms were thin, his shoulders were narrow. But his hands. Wendell noticed the hands. Even from a distance he could see they were dark with grease. Not the kind of dirt you pick up playing outside, the kind that comes from working with machines. Deep in the knuckles, under the nails, permanent. The boy walked with a steady, unhurried pace. When he got within about 20 feet of the car, he slowed down. He looked at the Mercedes, then at Wendell, then at the open hood, then back at Wendell. He stopped. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said. His voice was quiet but clear. Polite. No hesitation. "You having car trouble?" Wendell looked at him. Really looked at him. A skinny kid on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, with grease on his hands and holes in his shoes. "Yeah," Wendell said. "Engine died. You know anyone around here who fixes cars?" The boy nodded slowly. "I fix things, sir." Wendell almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, out of reflex. He looked at the boy, then at the car, then back at the boy. A $200,000 Mercedes AMG and a 13-year-old kid in dollar store sandals. The two did not exactly go together. What could this kid possibly know about a car like this? But then Wendell looked around. The empty road. The dead phone. The sun that showed no sign of mercy. He had been standing here for almost an hour. No one else had come. No one else was going to come. He stepped aside. "All right. Go ahead." Thing. The boy set his grocery bag down on the ground carefully. Then he walked to the front of the car and stood in front of the open hood. He did not touch anything. Not yet. He just looked. His eyes moved slowly across the engine, left to right, top to bottom, methodical, like he was reading a page. He leaned in closer, tilting his head to one side, then the other. His eyes stopped on something near the back of the engine block. Then they moved to the wiring harness on the left side. then to a small plug near the bottom. Wendell watched him, and something shifted. He had seen that look before. That exact look, the narrowed eyes, the slight tilt of the head, the way the gaze moved from system to system, not randomly but following a logic. He had seen it in boardrooms, in research labs, in the eyes of the most brilliant engineers his company had ever hired, men and women with PhDs and decades of experience. But never in a 13-year-old boy standing in worn-out slides on a dirt road in Alabama. "Sir," the boy said, still looking at the engine. "When the car stopped, did you hear a clicking sound? Like a fast ticking?" Wendell thought about it. Yeah, right before it died. A rapid clicking." The boy nodded. "And your dashboard. Did all the lights come on at once, or did they go one by one?" "All at once," Wendell said, "like a flash. Then everything went dark." The boy straightened up. He looked at Wendell with calm, certain eyes. "I think I know what it is, but I need to get something from my shop. I will be right back." "Your shop?" Wendell asked. "Yes, sir. It is just down the road. 2 minutes." Before Wendell could respond, the boy turned and jogged back the way he had come. His slide slapped against the dirt road as he ran. He disappeared around a bend in the road. Wendell stood there alone again. He crossed his arms and waited. Part of him felt foolish. He was a billionaire standing on a dirt road, putting his hope in a kid who had just jogged off in flip-flops. But another part of him, a quieter part, was curious. The way that boy had looked at the engine, the questions he had asked. Those were not random questions. Those were diagnostic questions, the kind a trained technician would ask. True to his word, the boy was back in less than 3 minutes. He was carrying a small cloth pouch, the kind you might keep marbles in. He was slightly out of breath, but already focused. He set the pouch on the edge of the car frame and opened it. Inside were a few simple things: a small wire brush, a piece of fine grit sandpaper, a short length of copper wire, and a small electrical connector, clearly handmade, soldered together from salvaged parts. The whole collection could not have been worth more than $2. "Sir," the boy said, "I am going to check your crankshaft position sensor. It is right here near the bottom of the engine block." He pointed to a small device tucked behind a bundle of wires. "Your crankshaft position sensor is what tells the car's computer when to fire the spark plugs," the boy explained, as he carefully moved the wiring aside to get a better look. "Think of it like this. The engine is an orchestra. All the parts are the instruments, but the sensor is the conductor. Without the conductor, nobody knows when to play, so everything just stops." He reached in and gently pulled the electrical connector attached to the sensor. It came apart easily, too easily. He held it up so Wendell could see. The metal contacts inside were coated in a thin layer of reddish-brown residue, corrosion. Dust and moisture from the dirt road had gotten inside the connector and built up a layer of grime so thin you could barely see it. But it was enough to block the signal. Enough to make the car's computer think the sensor was dead. Enough to shut the entire engine down. "See this," the boy said, holding the connector between his small, grease-stained fingers. "The connection is not broken. It is just dirty. But your car does not know the difference. All it knows is the signal stopped." He took the wire brush from his pouch and gently cleaned the contacts. Then he used the sandpaper to polish them until the metal shone. But he was not done. He traced the wire coming from the sensor with his fingers, following it along the engine block. About 6 inches down, he stopped. He had found something else. "Here," he said quietly, "the signal wire has a small break in the insulation. See, right here. The copper inside is not cut, but the exposed part has been touching the engine block. That is creating a short. Even if the connector was clean, this would still cause problems." He cut out the damaged section of wire with a small pocket knife, stripped both ends, and spliced in his own copper wire, wrapping the connection tight. Then he covered it with a piece of electrical tape from his pouch. He reconnected the sensor with his handmade connector, pressed it firmly into place, and gave it a gentle tug to make sure it held. The whole thing took 8 minutes. The boy stepped back from the engine and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Try starting it now, sir." Wendell looked at him. He looked at the engine. He looked at the small cloth pouch with its $2 worth of parts. Then he walked to the driver's seat and sat down. He turned the key. The engine roared to life. Smooth, clean, strong, like nothing had ever been wrong. The dashboard lit up normally. The air conditioning kicked on. The jazz came back through the speakers. Wendell sat there for a moment, both hands on the wheel staring straight ahead. Then he stepped out of the car and looked at the boy. Then at the engine. Then back at the boy. "You fixed it," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You actually fixed it." The boy nodded. A small nod. Not proud, not boastful, just matter of fact. "It was just a bad connection, sir. And a short in the wire. Small things." A $200,000 car, defeated by a $2 connector, fixed by a boy who had never set foot inside a real garage. Wendell stood there for a long moment. He did not speak. Something was happening inside his chest. Something warm and unfamiliar, like a door opening to a room he had forgotten existed. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. It was a slim leather wallet, Italian-made, the kind that held nothing but hundreds. He opened it and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. $500. He held them out toward the boy. "Take this," Wendell said. "You earned it, seriously." The boy looked at the money. His eyes stayed on it for a few seconds. $500. That was more money than he had ever seen in one place. That was months of groceries. That was new shoes for him and medicine for his grandmother. That was a lifetime of copper wire and salvaged parts. He looked at the money, and then he shook his head. "No, sir," the boy said quietly. "Thank you, but I cannot take it." Wendell blinked. "What? Why not? You just saved me out here." The boy hesitated. He looked down at his slides, then back up at Wendell. "My grandma says if you charge money for helping someone who is stuck, you are not helping. You are doing business." He paused. "And I was not doing business, sir. I was just helping." Wendell froze. He stood there on that dirt road with $500 in his outstretched hand, and he could not move. He had met hundreds of people in his life. Executives, politicians, investors, people who smiled to your face and calculated your net worth behind your eyes. Everyone always wanted something. Everyone always had an angle. Everyone always had a price. But not this boy. This 13-year-old kid, in worn-out slides and a t-shirt 2 sizes too big, had just fixed his car in 8 minutes and was refusing $500 because his grandmother taught him the difference between helping and doing business. Wendell lowered the money, slowly. He put it back in his wallet, and he looked at the boy with different eyes. "What is your name?" Wendell asked. "Jalen, sir. Jalen Tate." Jalen, Wendell repeated. "Where did you learn to do that?" "To fix engines like that," Jalen shrugged. "Books mostly. I found some at the library, and sometimes I watch videos on YouTube when I can get to the library's Wi-Fi. But mostly, I just take things apart and figure out how they work. I have been doing it since I was little." Wendell stared at him. "You taught yourself all of that?" "Yes, sir." Wendell did not pull out more money. He did not offer a handout. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and took out a business card. Simple, white, black letters. Hayes, Technologies, Wendell Hayes, CEO. But he did not say what the man in the other story said. He did not tell the boy to come to his office. He did not invite him to the city. Instead, Wendell said something different. "Jalen, can I come back tomorrow? I would like to see your workshop, where you fix things." Jalen looked confused. No one had ever asked to see the shed before. People in the village knew about it, but nobody cared. It was just a shed, just a kid messing with junk. "My workshop," Jalen said. "Yes," Wendell said. "If that is all right with you." Jalen looked at the business card. He turned it over in his greasy fingers. Then he looked up at Wendell and nodded slowly. "Sure, sir. I will be there." Wendell got into his car. The engine purred smoothly. The air conditioning was cold. The jazz played through the speakers. Everything was back to normal. But Wendell did not feel normal. Something had shifted. Something small but heavy like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples out in every direction. He looked in the rearview mirror as he drove away. Jalen was standing on the side of the dirt road, the business card in one hand, the small cloth pouch in the other. The afternoon sun lit up his thin frame, and for a moment he looked both very small and very large at the same time. Wendell Hayes had invested in hundreds of companies. He had funded startups, research labs, and billion-dollar ventures. But he had never met an investment quite like this one. That evening the sun went down slow over Tillman. The sky turned from gold to pink to a deep bruised purple, and the cicadas started their nightly chorus loud and steady, like they were singing the whole town to sleep. Inside the small wooden house at the end of the back road, the kitchen smelled like black-eyed peas and cornbread. Opal Tate stood at the stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon that was older than Jalen. The cornbread was already cooling on a wire rack on the counter, golden brown, and cracked on top the way she always made it. Jalen sat at the kitchen table. His hands were clean, now scrubbed with dish soap until the water ran clear, but the grease was still there, in the creases of his knuckles. It never fully came out. He was quiet, quieter than usual, and Opal noticed. She always noticed. "You all right, baby?" she asked, without turning around. "Yes, ma'am." A pause. "Grandma, a man came to the road today. He had a real nice car, a Mercedes, a big one." Opal kept stirring. His car broke down. I fixed it for him." Now she turned around. "You fixed a Mercedes?" "Yes, ma'am. It was just a bad sensor connection and a short in the wire. Took me about 8 minutes." Opal looked at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head and turned back to the stove. "Lord have mercy. He tried to give me money, Grandma. $500. Opal's hand stopped stirring. $500. That was more than she made in a month, sewing hems and patching clothes for the neighbors. She could feel the weight of that number pressing against her chest. "Did you take it?" she asked carefully. "No, ma'am. I told him what you always say, about helping and doing business." Opal was quiet for a moment. Then she let out a slow breath. "Good boy." They sat down and ate together. The peas were warm and salty. The cornbread was soft in the middle and crunchy at the edges. Jalen ate 2 helpings. He was always hungry these days, growing. After a while, Jalen said he gave me his card. He said he wants to come back tomorrow and see my shed. Opal set her spoon down. She looked at her grandson across the table, and something shifted in her eyes. Not anger, something older, something heavier. "Caution. Be careful with rich folks, baby," she said. "They come and go, but your hands and your brain, those stay. Those are yours. Nobody can take them from you." Jalen nodded. He did not argue with his grandmother. He never did. Now, to understand Jalen, you have to understand where he came from. And where he came from was nowhere. At least, that is how the world saw it. His mother's name was Denise. She was Opal's only daughter. Denise had Jalen when she was 21. She was not married. The father, a man named Terrell, left before Jalen was born. Just packed a bag one night and drove away. No goodbye. No phone call. No forwarding address. He was just gone. Denise raised Jalen alone for 4 years. She worked at a gas station during the day and cleaned offices at night. She was tired all the time. But she loved that boy. She loved him with everything she had. Then she got sick. It started as a cough that would not go away. Then it turned into something worse. Pneumonia, the doctor said. Denise did not have health insurance. She could not afford the medicine. She went to the emergency room twice, and both times they gave her a prescription and sent her home. She could not fill the prescription because it cost more than she made in a week. Denise died on a Tuesday morning in March. Jalen was 4 years old. He did not understand what was happening. He just knew his mother was not waking up. In America, over 27 million people do not have health insurance. Many of them are in rural areas. Many of them are young mothers like Denise who work 2 jobs and still cannot afford to see a doctor. That is not opinion. That is fact. And it is the kind of fact that most people do not think about until it touches someone they know. After Denise passed, Opal took Jalen in. She was 54 years old, living on Social Security, and whatever she earned mending clothes for neighbors. It was not much. Some months she had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. She always chose groceries. Jalen started fixing things when he was 7. It began with the kitchen fan, the same one he had just repaired today actually. It broke the first time during a heat wave, and Opal could not afford a new one. Jalen asked if he could look at it. She said yes, mostly to keep him busy. He took it apart on the kitchen floor, studied every piece, and somehow got it working again. He was 7 years old. After that word got around, the neighbors started bringing him things. A radio that had stopped working, a flashlight with a broken switch, a toaster that sparked every time you plugged it in. Jalen fixed them all. He did not charge anything. He just liked knowing how things worked. When he was 10, he found the books. The public library in the next town over was clearing out old donations. They put the unwanted books in boxes by the back door for anyone to take. Most people walked past without looking. Jalen did not. He dug through every box. At the very bottom, underneath romance novels and travel guides nobody wanted, he found a thick paperback called Auto Repair for Dummies. Next to it, a water-stained copy of Basic Electrical Circuits. He carried those books 3 miles home. He read them cover to cover. Then he read them again and again. He did not have a teacher to explain the parts he did not understand, so he did what he always did. He figured it out himself. He took apart a broken lawnmower engine that Mr. Hank had thrown away and studied every single piece. He laid the pieces out on the shed floor and drew each one in pencil on the wall, labeling everything until the diagram was complete. Every Saturday, Jalen walked 3 miles to the library. Not for the books this time, for the Wi-Fi. He would sit at one of the old computers in the back corner and watch YouTube videos about engine repair, electrical wiring, and how solar panels worked. He wrote notes on scraps of paper and brought them home. The librarian, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, let him stay past closing time sometimes. She never asked why a 13-year-old was watching videos about alternators and voltage regulators. She just let him learn. In America, there are over 7 million children growing up in rural poverty. Many of them will never see the inside of a science lab, never meet an engineer, never hold a textbook that is not falling apart. But that does not mean they do not have the mind for it. It just means no one is looking. Jalen was one of those children, brilliant, hungry to learn, invisible to the world. That night, Jalen lay on his small bed in the room he shared with the water heater. The bed frame was made of metal, and it squeaked every time he moved. His pillow was flat, his blanket was thin, but the room was his. He held up the business card Wendell had given him. In the dim glow of the porch light coming through the window, he could read the words, Hayes Technologies, CEO, Wendell Hayes. Below that, a phone number and an address in New York City. Jalen did not know what Hayes Technologies was. He did not know that the man who had stood on that dirt road was worth more than $3 billion. He did not know any of that. All he knew was that today, for the first time in his life, someone had looked at the things he built in that shed and had not laughed. Someone had not said, "That is nice, kid." Someone had not walked away. Someone had asked to come back. Jalen held the card against his chest and closed his eyes. He did not pray. He was not sure how, but he whispered something into the dark. Please be real. Please do not just be another person who leaves. The next morning, a rented Ford pickup truck turned off the county highway and onto the back road leading into Tillman. It was not the kind of vehicle that usually came down this road. It was too clean, too new. But it was also not a Mercedes. It was not flashy. It did not draw attention. That was on purpose. Wendell Hayes was behind the wheel. He had not gone to the airport last night. He had called Denise, his assistant from the hotel in Birmingham, and told her to cancel his Monday meetings. All of them. She had gone quiet for a moment. In 15 years of working for Wendell, she had never heard him cancel a full day of meetings. Not once. Not for illness. Not for vacation. Not for anything. "Sir, is everything all right?" she had asked. "Everything is fine," Wendell said. "I just need to see something." He did not explain further. He was not sure he could. Now he drove the pickup slowly down the dirt road, windows down, taking in the scenery he had barely noticed the day before. The old houses, the empty lots, the rusted mailboxes. He had grown up in a place like this. Different city, different state, but the same feeling, the feeling of being left behind. He pulled up near the house at the end of the road and parked. A few neighbors were sitting on a porch across the way. They stopped talking and watched him. A stranger in a clean truck. In a place like Tillman, strangers meant trouble. Wendell walked around the side of the house toward the shed. And there was Jalen already inside, sitting on his milk crate, working on something. The boy looked up when he heard footsteps. His eyes went wide. "You came back," Jalen said. "Not a question. A statement. Full of surprise." "I told you I would," Wendell said. "I know, but people say a lot of things." That sentence hit Wendell harder than it should have. Because it was true. People did say a lot of things, especially people like him. And in places like this, words without follow-through were worse than silence. Wendell stood at the entrance of the shed and looked around, really looked. Yesterday he had seen a boy fix his car. Today he saw something else entirely. On the left wall, drawn in careful pencil lines, was a diagram of a 4-stroke internal combustion engine. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. Every cylinder, every valve, every piston rod, drawn with the kind of precision you would expect from a second-year engineering student. Not a 13-year-old with no formal training. On the shelf to the right, salvaged parts were organized with a neatness that bordered on obsessive, bolts sorted by size in glass jars, wires coiled and labeled with masking tape, fuses, capacitors, connectors, everything a working electronics bench would have, except none of it was bought. All of it was found, rescued, given a second life. But what stopped Wendell cold was the thing sitting on the workbench in the corner. It was a small motor about the size of a coffee can mounted on a wooden base. Connected to it by a tangle of wires was a small solar panel, maybe 8 inches square, clearly salvaged from a broken garden light, and connected to the motor on the other side was a car battery. "What is this?" Wendell asked, pointing to the setup. "A charging system," Jalen said, walking over. "The solar panel collects energy during the day, and the motor acts as a converter to regulate the voltage so it does not overcharge the battery. I use it to keep Mr. Hank's truck battery alive. He does not drive much anymore, so the battery dies if you do not charge it." Wendell stared at the setup. It was crude, held together with wire and tape and hope. But it worked. The principle behind it, using a motor as a voltage regulator for a solar charging system, was not something you stumbled onto by accident. You had to understand how electricity flowed. You had to understand voltage and resistance. You had to understand why too much current could destroy a battery and why too little would not charge it. "This was not tinkering. This was engineering," Jalen Wendell said slowly. "This charging system. Did someone show you how to build it?" "No, sir. You figured it out yourself." "Yes, sir. Took me a while, though. The first one I built overcharged the battery, and it swelled up. I had to figure out why. Turned out I needed something to limit the voltage, so I used the motor as a regulator. It is not perfect, but it works." Wendell walked to the wall with the engine diagram. He studied it closely. Every line was accurate. Every label was correct. He pointed to a section near the bottom. "This part here. The crankshaft and the connecting rods. Where did you learn how they fit together?" Jalen came and stood beside him. "I took apart Mr. Hank's old lawnmower engine, the one he threw out last year. I laid every piece on the floor and drew them one by one before I put it back together. Took me 3 tries to get the drawing right." In the world of engineering, there is a concept called first principles thinking. It means you do not just memorize how something works, you break it down to its most basic parts and understand why it works. It is the difference between a mechanic who replaces parts and an engineer who designs systems. Most people with PhDs struggle to think this way. Jalen did it naturally. without knowing it had a name. Without knowing, it was rare. Wendell turned from the wall and looked at Jalen. The boy stood there in his faded t-shirt and worn jeans, grease on his fingers, holes in his shoes. He looked like any other kid in Tillman, but he was not any other kid. "You know what you are, Jalen," Wendell said quietly. Jalen shook his head. "You are an engineer, a real one." Jalen blinked. He did not know what to say. Nobody had ever called him anything like that before. In school, he was the quiet kid who sat in the back. In the village, he was just the boy who fixed things. Nobody had ever looked at what he did and given it a name. "I am just a kid who likes taking stuff apart, sir," Jalen said. "No," Wendell said. "You are much more than that." Something warm flickered behind Jalen's eyes. He looked down at his shoes. Then he looked back up, and, for just a moment, the smallest, most careful smile crossed his face. The smile of someone who had just been told for the first time that the thing he loved doing actually mattered. But outside that shed, the village was watching. By the time Wendell drove away that afternoon, the talk had already started. It moved from porch to porch, house to house, the way news always moved in small towns. Quiet at first, then louder. "Did you see that man come back? The one with the clean truck? He was in that boy's shed again, for over 2 hours. What does a city man want with a kid like Jalen? Nothing good. I can tell you that." People in Tillman had seen this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. Outsiders who came with smiles and promises. Church groups who showed up for a weekend, took pictures with the children, and never came back. Politicians who drove through during election season and forgot the town existed the day after votes were counted. A nonprofit that once promised to build a community center collected donations and disappeared. In places like Tillman, hope was the most dangerous currency, because when it was given and then taken away, it left a wound deeper than poverty ever could. That is the thing about broken promises. They do not just disappoint people. They teach people not to trust. And once that lesson is learned, it is almost impossible to unlearn. Mr. Clyde Robinson lived 2 houses down from Opal. He was 73 years old, a retired handyman with bad knees and strong opinions. He had known Opal for over 40 years. That evening, he walked over to her porch and sat down in the chair next to hers without being invited. That was how things worked between old neighbors. "Opal," he said, getting straight to the point. "Who is that man coming around to see your boy?" Opal was shelling peas into a bowl on her lap. She did not look up. "His name is Wendell Hayes. He says he is some kind of businessman." "Businessman," Clyde repeated. He said the word like it tasted bad. "And what does a businessman want with Jalen?" "He says he wants to help." Clyde leaned forward. "You watch out, Opal. Rich people do not come to places like this to help. They come to take. They always take." Opal did not respond. She just kept shelling peas, but her hands moved a little faster, a little harder. That was how you knew something was bothering Opal Tate. Her hands told the truth, even when her mouth stayed shut. That night, Opal lay awake in bed. She thought about Jalen, about the light in his eyes when he talked about that man and his car, about the business card sitting on the kitchen table. She thought about her daughter Denise, who had trusted a man once and been left alone. She thought about Jalen's father, who had promised to stay and vanished like smoke. She had raised this boy from the time he was 4 years old. She had fed him, clothed him, held him when he had nightmares, walked him to the bus stop every morning. She had done it all on a Social Security check and the few dollars she earned sewing. She had never asked for help. Not once. Because every time someone offered help, it came with strings, or it came with a time limit, or it just did not come at all. The next time Wendell drove into Tillman, Opal was waiting on the porch. She stood up when he pulled in. She did not smile, she did not wave. She just stood there with her arms crossed and her jaw set. Wendell got out of the truck and walked toward the house. He could tell immediately that something had changed. The warmth from his last visit was gone, replaced by something solid and cold. "Good morning, Mrs. Tate," Wendell said politely. "Mr. Hayes," Opal said. Her voice was even, controlled. "Before you go back to that shed, I need to talk to you." "Of course, ma'am." They stood on the porch. Opal did not invite him inside. That told Wendell everything he needed to know. "What do you want with my grandson, Mr. Hayes?" she asked. Direct. No softness. "I want to help him, ma'am. He has a remarkable gift." "People have said that to me before," Opal said. Her eyes did not blink. "About his mother. About his father." Help never stayed long. Wendell opened his mouth to respond, but Opal was not finished. "I have watched people come into this town with their big smiles and their big words. I have watched them make promises to children who believed every word, and I have watched those same children sit on these porches waiting for someone who never came back." Her voice did not waver. "I will not let that happen to Jalen. Not again. Not while I am still breathing." Wendell stood very still. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He just listened, because he understood something in that moment. Something important. In Opal's world, a rich man saying, "I want to help," was not a comfort. It was a threat. It meant hope. And hope in a place where hope had been broken 100 times before was the most dangerous thing you could offer. Mrs. Tate Wendell said carefully, "I hear you, and you are right to protect him. You do not know me. You have no reason to trust me." He paused. "I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My mother raised me alone. We did not have much. I know what it feels like to have someone promise something and then disappear. I am not going to do that." Opal studied his face. She had spent 67 years reading people. She could tell when someone was performing and when someone was telling the truth. This man's eyes did not flinch. But she did not soften. "Not yet. Words are easy, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Time is what tells the truth." Wendell nodded. "Then give me time, ma'am. That is all I am asking." Opal looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then she uncrossed her arms. She did not smile. But she did not send him away either. "Jalen is in the shed," she said, and then she turned and walked inside. Wendell stood on the porch alone. He took a slow breath. He had closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had negotiated with boards of directors and heads of state. But that conversation with a 67-year-old woman on a creaking porch in rural Alabama was the hardest negotiation he had ever faced. Because Opal was not protecting money. She was not protecting a company. She was protecting the only thing she had left in this world. And Wendell knew, standing there in the afternoon heat, that if he was going to help Jalen, he would have to earn Opal's trust first. Not buy it. Not charm it. Earn it. And trust in a place like Tillman was not given. It was built. Slowly. Quietly. One kept promise at a time. 2 weeks after Wendell's last visit, the water stopped. It happened on a Wednesday, the hottest Wednesday in July. The kind of day where the air itself felt like it was cooking, where the ground cracked under your feet and even the dogs hid in the shade and refused to move. Tillman had one well. One single well that served the entire community. It was drilled 30 years ago by a county program that no longer existed, and it ran on an electric pump housed in a small concrete shed behind the church. That pump pulled water up from deep underground and pushed it through a network of old pipes to every house in the village. When it worked, you did not think about it. You turned on the tap and water came out. Simple. But when it stopped working, everything stopped. Miss Della turned on her kitchen faucet that morning, and nothing came out. Not a trickle, not a drop. Just a dry cough of air, and then silence. She walked next door and asked her neighbor. Same thing. No water. Within an hour, everyone in Tillman knew. The pump was dead. Mr. Hank drove out to the pump shed and opened the door. The machine sat there, humming faintly, shaking slightly but producing nothing. He pressed the reset button on the side. Nothing happened. He pressed it again. Still nothing. He did not know what else to do. Someone called the nearest pump repair company. They were in Montgomery, 2 hours away. The man on the phone said he could come out on Friday. 2 days, and the repair would cost $1,500, minimum, plus parts. $1,500. In Tillman, that was a fortune. Mr. Hank passed a hat around, and after going to every house in the village, he collected $211. That was everything. Every spare dollar the community had. No water meant no cooking, no bathing, no flushing toilets, no watering the small vegetable gardens that half the town depended on for food. In this heat, it meant danger, especially for the elderly, especially for the children. Now here is something most people in cities do not think about. In rural America, millions of people depend on private wells and community pump systems for their water. When those systems fail, there is no backup. There is no city water department to call. There is no fire hydrant on the corner. You either fix it yourself or you wait. And waiting in 100-degree heat with no water is not just uncomfortable, it is dangerous. That afternoon, Jalen walked down to the pump shed. A small group of neighbors had gathered outside, standing in the shade of the church, talking in worried voices. He listened for a while. Then he spoke up. "I can take a look at it," Jalen said. A few people turned to look at him. One woman, Mrs. Banks, shook her head. "Baby, this is not a fan or a radio. This is the water pump." "A kid," another man said. "Fixing the water pump, we need a real repairman." But Mr. Clyde, who was leaning against the church wall with his arms crossed, looked at Jalen for a long moment. The same Clyde who had warned Opal about rich people. The same Clyde who had doubted everything. "Let the boy try," Clyde said quietly. "What have we got to lose?" Nobody argued. Because the truth was, they had nothing to lose. The pump was already broken. The repairman was 2 days away. And they did not have the money to pay him anyway. Jalen walked into the pump shed. It was small and hot inside. The pump motor sat on a concrete platform connected to pipes that disappeared into the ground. He knelt beside it and listened. The motor was running. He could hear it humming and feel the vibration through the concrete floor. But no water was moving through the pipes. He placed his hand on the outflow pipe. Dry. No pressure. He checked the pressure gauge mounted on the wall. The needle sat at 0. He thought about it. The motor was running, which meant power was fine. But no water was moving, which meant either the pump was not pulling or something was blocking the flow. Now, a water pump works on a simple principle. A motor spins a mechanism that creates pressure, and that pressure pushes water up from underground and through the pipes. There is a part called the pressure switch that tells the pump when to turn on and off based on how much pressure is in the system. And there is a part called the diaphragm, a flexible rubber disc inside the pump that actually creates the suction. Think of it like breathing. The diaphragm expands and contracts, pulling water in and pushing it out. If the diaphragm tears, the pump breathes but moves nothing. Like lungs with a hole in them. Jalen opened the access panel on the side of the pump. He checked the pressure switch first. It was stuck. The contact points inside were corroded, fused together from years of moisture and heat. The switch was telling the motor to run, but it was not regulating the pressure properly. He cleaned the contacts with his pocket knife, scraping away the buildup until the metal was shiny again. Then he checked the diaphragm. There it was. A tear. Not a big one, about the size of a quarter, but enough to kill the pump's ability to create suction. The rubber had dried out and cracked from years of use and Alabama heat. Jalen did not have a replacement diaphragm. That part would cost $80 even if he could find one, but he had something else. He ran back to his shed and came back with a piece of thick rubber cut from an old tire inner tube, a pair of scissors, and some steel wire. He cut the rubber to match the shape of the original diaphragm. He trimmed it carefully, checking the fit twice. Then he used the steel wire to secure it in place, making sure the seal was tight. It was not a factory part. It was not perfect. But it would hold. He reassembled the pump. He reset the pressure switch. Then he stepped back and pressed the power button. The motor hummed. The pump shook slightly. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Just the sound of the machine working. Then a deep gurgling sound came from the pipes, like something waking up underground. The pressure gauge needle started to climb. 5 pounds. 10, 15, 20. Water. Someone outside shouted. The tap is running. The water is on. People came out of their houses. Miss Della stood at her kitchen window laughing. Mr. Hank turned on the spigot behind his store. and water poured out clear and cold. Children ran through the spray screaming and laughing. Opal was standing near the church. She had not said a word the entire time Jalen was working. She just stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, watching. When the water came on and the people started cheering, she pressed her hand over her mouth and closed her eyes. A tear slid down her cheek. Then another. Mr. Clyde walked up to Jalen, who was standing in the doorway of the pump shed, wiping his hands on his jeans. The old man looked at the boy. Then he placed his hand on Jalen's shoulder. Heavy, firm, the hand of a man who did not give praise easily. "I was wrong about you, son," Clyde said. "I was wrong." Jalen did not say anything. He just nodded. But inside his chest, something swelled. Something warm and full that he had never felt before. The feeling of being needed. Not by one person, by everyone. Wendell was not there that day. He was back in New York, sitting in a board meeting reviewing quarterly projections. He did not know about the pump, not yet. But when he called Jalen later that week and the boy told him what happened, Wendell went quiet on the phone for a long time. "You fixed the entire village's water supply," Wendell said slowly, "with a piece of tire rubber and some wire." "Yes, sir," Jalen said. "It is not a permanent fix. The diaphragm will need a real replacement eventually, but it is working for now." Wendell sat in his office on the 42nd floor of a building in Manhattan. He looked out the window at the skyline. Billions of dollars of real estate, thousands of engineers, unlimited resources. And a 13-year-old boy with a pocket knife and a piece of rubber had just done something that none of his money could have done fast enough. Wendell made a decision. He flew back to Alabama 3 days later. This time he did not drive a rental. He took a taxi from the airport to Tillman. He went straight to Opal's house. But he did not go to the shed. He sat down on the porch and asked to speak with Opal alone. Opal brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat across from him. She did not ask why he was there. She already knew something was coming. Mrs. Tate Wendell said there is a school in Atlanta. It is called the Calhoun Academy of Science and Engineering. It is a boarding school for students with exceptional talent in math, science, and technology. The best students in the Southeast go there. And I want to send Jalen. Opal set her glass down slowly. She did not speak. "Full scholarship," Wendell continued. "Tuition, room, board, books, everything. I will personally fund it. He would live at the school during the semester and come home for holidays and summers." Opal looked at him. Her eyes were steady, but her hands resting on her lap were trembling. "Ma'am," Wendell said gently, "your grandson has a gift. But a gift without opportunity is like a seed without soil. It is still alive, but it cannot grow." Opal was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that fills a room and makes everything else stop. Then she spoke. "And what happens when the soil dries up, Mr. Hayes? When you lose interest and move on to the next project, what happens to my boy then?" Wendell leaned forward. "I understand why you would ask that. And you deserve an honest answer." He paused. "When I was 14 years old, I lived in a 2-room apartment on the south side of Chicago with my mother. I had nothing. No father, no money, no future that anyone could see. But I had a teacher. His name was Mr. Givens. He taught math. And one day he pulled me aside after class and said, 'Wendell, you are too smart to stay here. Let me help you.' He helped me apply for a scholarship. He wrote the letters. He drove me to the interview. And because of that one man, I got out. I went to college. I built a company. I built a life." Wendell's voice was thick. "I am not going to pretend I am doing this for selfless reasons. I am doing this because someone did it for me. And if I do not do it for someone else, then everything Mr. Givens invested in me dies with me." Opal looked at him. She saw something she had not seen before. Not the businessman, not the billionaire. She saw the boy from Chicago, the one who had been saved by a single act of faith from someone who believed in him. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "You bring him back every summer. And you call me every Sunday. That is my condition." "Yes, ma'am," Wendell said. "Every summer, every Sunday. You have my word. Then we will talk to Jalen." They found him in the shed, of course. He was rewiring a broken flashlight for Miss Della. He looked up when they walked in and immediately knew something was different. His grandmother's eyes were red. Wendell's face was serious but soft. Wendell explained the offer. The school, the scholarship, the opportunity to learn from real teachers in real labs with real equipment. Everything Jalen had taught himself from books and YouTube, he could now learn properly, formally, deeply. Jalen listened. He did not interrupt. When Wendell finished, the boy was quiet for a long time. "What about Grandma?" Jalen said. His voice was small. "Who takes care of her when I am gone? I will arrange for someone from the community to check on her," Wendell said. "And I will make sure she has everything she needs." "That is not the same," Jalen said. His eyes were wet. "I am the one who fixes things around the house. I am the one who makes sure the stove pilot light is on. I am the one who checks the locks at night." Opal stepped forward. She took Jalen's face in her hands, her rough, warm, sewing-scarred hands holding the grease-stained cheeks of her grandson. "Go, baby," she said. Her voice cracked but held. "Go learn everything you can. And when you come back, you will not just fix machines, you will fix lives." Jalen's lip trembled. Then the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, steady tears rolling down his face while his grandmother held him. Wendell turned away. He walked to the doorway of the shed and looked out at the yard. His jaw was tight, his eyes burned. He pressed his thumb and finger against the bridge of his nose and took a slow breath. He had signed billion-dollar deals without flinching. But watching a grandmother tell her grandson to fly, knowing it meant she would be alone, was the bravest thing he had ever witnessed. 3 weeks later, Jalen stood in front of the Calhoun Academy of Science and Engineering in Atlanta, Georgia. The building was 4 stories tall, made of glass and brick, with a wide green lawn and a fountain out front. Students walked in and out in matching navy blazers and khaki pants. They carried laptops and tablets. They laughed in groups, easy and confident, like they owned the place. Because most of them did, or at least their parents did. Calhoun was one of the top private STEM schools in the Southeast. Tuition alone was over $40,000 a year. The parking lot had BMWs driven by 16-year-olds. Jalen stood at the front gate with a suitcase Wendell had bought him. He wore new clothes, a clean button-down shirt, pressed pants, new shoes that still felt stiff on his feet. He looked like any other student from a distance, but up close the difference was obvious. The way he stood, slightly hunched arms close to his body, the way his eyes darted from building to building, wide and uncertain, the way he held his suitcase with both hands, like someone afraid of losing the only thing he owned. He walked through the front doors. The hallway was wide and bright. The floors were polished. There were display cases filled with trophies and plaques. Science fair winners, robotics championships, patent holders. Jalen read the names as he walked past. None of them looked like him. In his room, he met his roommate, a boy named Parker from Buckhead, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Atlanta. Parker glanced at Jalen, nodded once, and went back to setting up his dual monitors. "Where are you from?" Parker asked, without looking up. "Alabama," Jalen said. "A small town called Tillman." Parker paused. "Never heard of it. Most people have not." That was the end of the conversation. In the hallway later, a group of students were talking outside the engineering lab. When Jalen walked past one of them, a tall boy with a lacrosse team jacket looked him up and down. "New kid?" the boy asked. "Yes," Jalen said. "Scholarship." Jalen hesitated, then nodded. The boy turned to his friends and smirked. "Where did they find this one?" "A junkyard." The group laughed, not loud, not cruel enough to get in trouble, just enough to let Jalen know he did not belong. He kept walking. He did not look back. The first week was hard. The classroom setup was different from anything Jalen had experienced. Everything was digital. Assignments were submitted on laptops. Notes were taken on tablets. Tests were timed and computer-based. Jalen had never owned a computer. He had used the library's desktop once a week to watch YouTube videos. That was it. In Mr. Pemberton's Engineering Fundamentals class, the first assessment was a written exam on basic circuit theory, multiple choice, timed, on a tablet. Jalen knew the material. He knew it cold. He could have drawn every circuit from memory on the shed wall, but the tablet was slow in his hands. He second-guessed the touch screen. He accidentally submitted a section too early. He ran out of time on the last 3 questions. His score came back, 72 out of 100. Average, unremarkable. Parker scored 94. So did most of the other students. Jalen saw a few of them glance at his score and look away. One girl whispered something to her friend. They both laughed quietly. Here is the truth about the American education system that most people do not talk about. It is designed to measure one kind of intelligence, the kind that shows up on screens and standardized tests, the kind that fits neatly into multiple-choice bubbles and timed assessments. But there is another kind of intelligence, the kind that lives in your hands, the kind that figures out how a broken engine works by taking it apart 3 times. The kind that builds a solar charging system from a junked garden light. That kind of intelligence does not have a test, and because it does not have a test, it often gets overlooked. But it cannot be hidden forever. The following week, Mr. Pemberton announced a practical assessment, a hands-on exercise. Each student would receive a small electric motor with a deliberately introduced fault. They had 30 minutes to diagnose the problem, identify the failed component, and repair it. The students sat at their workbenches. Some of them opened their textbooks. Some pulled up diagrams on their tablets. Some just stared at the motor, unsure where to start. Jalen picked up the motor. He turned it over in his hands. He plugged it in and listened to the sound it made. A faint whine, then nothing. He unplugged it. He removed the back casing with a screwdriver. He looked at the brushes, the commutator, the winding. His fingers moved with the certainty of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He found the fault in under 2 minutes. A burned-out brush contact. He replaced it using a spare from the parts tray, reassembled the motor, and plugged it back in. It ran perfectly. 7 minutes, total, from start to finish. Mr. Pemberton walked over. He looked at the running motor. He looked at Jalen. He checked his watch. "You are done?" Mr. Pemberton asked. "Yes, sir." Mr. Pemberton looked around the room. The other students were still working. Most had not even opened their motors yet. He looked back at Jalen. And for the first time since Jalen had walked into that school, someone looked at him with something other than pity or amusement. It was respect. That night, Jalen sat on his bed in his dorm room. Parker was asleep already, headphones on laptop still open. Jalen took out the old phone Wendell had given him and dialed his grandmother's number. It rang 3 times. "Hello, baby," Opal said. Her voice sounded far away. Tired, but warm. "Hi, Grandma. How is school?" Jalen was quiet for a moment. He thought about the exam he had barely passed. The boys who laughed. The girl who whispered. The junkyard comment. Then he thought about the motor. 7 minutes. Mr. Pemberton's face. "It is hard," Jalen said, "but I am learning." "You want to come home?" Opal asked. No judgment, just love. Jalen looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline, a world of glass and light, 1,000,000 miles from the shed in Tillman. "No, Grandma," he said. "I want to stay. I just need to learn their way of doing things." He paused. "But I am not forgetting ours." Opal smiled on the other end of the line. He could not see it, but he could hear it. "That is my boy," she said softly. "That is my boy." 6 months passed, and in those 6 months, Jalen transformed. He still struggled with the digital side of things. Typing was slow. Software took time. But his hands, his mind, his ability to see a problem and break it down to its bones that only got sharper. Mr. Pemberton started using Jalen's practical work as examples in class. The students who had laughed at him in September were asking him for help by February. But Jalen was working on something bigger, something personal. The school's annual Science and Engineering Fair was the biggest event of the year. Companies sent recruiters. Universities sent admissions officers. Scholarships were handed out on the spot. For most students, it was a chance to show off. For Jalen, It was something else entirely. His project was a portable water filtration system designed for rural communities without access to clean water. It ran on a small solar panel, used a mechanical pump he had built from salvaged parts, and filtered water through layers of sand, gravel, and activated charcoal packed into a PVC pipe housing. The whole thing could be built for under $75. And it worked. He had designed it thinking about Tillman, about the well that broke, about the 2 days without water in 100-degree heat, about the $1,500 nobody had. He had solved a problem that was real to him. Not theoretical, not abstract. Real. The night before the fair, Jalen was in the school workshop putting the final touches on his display board. His phone buzzed. It was Wendell. Jalen. Wendell's voice was careful. Too careful. The way people talk when they are about to say something they wish they did not have to say. "Yes, sir, it is your grandmother. She collapsed this afternoon. They took her to the hospital in Montgomery. Her heart. They are running tests, but the doctors say it is serious." Jalen's hands stopped moving. The workshop went silent around him, even though other students were still working at their benches. Everything just went quiet. "I need to go home," Jalen said. "I know," Wendell said. "But the fair is tomorrow morning. If you leave now, you miss it. I do not care about the fair." "I know you do not, but your grandmother would." Wendell paused. "Listen to me. The fair starts at 9. Your presentation slot is at 10:15. It takes about 40 minutes. I will have a car waiting for you at the school at 11. I will fly you from Atlanta to Montgomery on a private charter. You will be at her bedside by 2 in the afternoon. I promise." Jalen was quiet. His hand gripped the edge of the workbench. "You can do both," Jalen, Wendell said. "You do not have to choose." The next morning, Jalen stood in front of the judges in the school gymnasium. His display was simple. No fancy animations, no expensive materials, just a working prototype on a folding table, a hand-drawn diagram, and a boy in a borrowed blazer who knew exactly what he was talking about. He did not start with data. He started with a story. "Where I come from," Jalen said, "there is one well for the whole village. Last summer the pump broke. The nearest repairman wanted $1,500. We did not have it. So for 2 days, 200 people had no water. No water to drink, no water to cook, no water to wash. I was the one who fixed that pump. With a piece of rubber from an old tire and some steel wire." He paused. "That is when I decided I wanted to build something so that no community would ever have to go through that again." He explained the system, how the solar panel powered the pump, how the filtration layers worked, how the whole thing could be assembled by anyone with basic tools. He showed the cost breakdown. $73.40. He showed the water quality test results. Clean, every time. The gymnasium was quiet when he finished. Not the awkward quiet of confusion. The quiet of people who had just heard something that mattered. Then one of the judges stood up. Then another. Then the whole panel. They clapped. Jalen did not win because he had the fanciest slides or the biggest words. He won because he had solved a real problem that he had lived through. And everyone in that room could feel it. By 11:15, Jalen was in a car heading to the airport. By 1:45, he was walking through the doors of the hospital in Montgomery. By 2 o'clock, he was sitting beside his grandmother's bed holding her hand. Opal's face was thin. Her skin looked pale against the white sheets. Tubes ran from her arm to a bag hanging on a metal pole. Her eyes were closed. The heart monitor beeped slow and steady beside her. Jalen sat in the plastic chair next to the bed and held her hand. Her fingers felt small, fragile, not like the strong hands that had shelled peas and sewn hems and held his face on the day she told him to go. After a few minutes, Opal's eyes opened. Slowly, she turned her head and saw him. A smile spread across her face. Weak but real. "Did you win?" she whispered. Jalen nodded. His eyes were full. "I knew you would," she said. And then she closed her eyes again, still smiling, still holding his hand. 9 years later, on a warm May afternoon, Jalen Tate walked across the stage at Georgia Institute of Technology and received his degree in mechanical engineering. He was 22 years old. In the audience, two people sat together in the front row, Wendell Hayes in a navy suit clapping with both hands above his head, and beside him in a wheelchair with a blanket over her knees, Opal Tate. 76 years old, frail, tired, but there. She had told the doctors she was going to that graduation if they had to carry her there on a stretcher. They did not argue. When Jalen walked off the stage with his diploma, he went straight to his grandmother. He knelt beside her wheelchair and placed the diploma in her lap. "This is yours, Grandma," he said, "every page of it." Opal held the diploma with trembling hands. She could not read the words through her tears. She just held it against her chest and nodded. After graduation, Jalen received offers from 3 major engineering firms, good salaries, big cities, corner offices. He turned them all down. Instead, he went home, back to Tillman, back to the dirt road, back to the shed. But the shed was different now. With funding from Wendell and prize money from the science fair and 2 grants Jalen had written himself, the old rusted tin shed had been rebuilt. Expanded. Equipped. It had workbenches, tool sets, a small computer lab, and a library of engineering books. A sign hung above the door, painted in clean black letters on a white board. The shed. Free vocational training for rural youth. Jalen ran it himself. 3 days a week he taught classes. Basic mechanics, electrical wiring, solar energy, water systems. Kids came from Tillman and from the surrounding towns. Some walked. Some got rides from their grandparents. They came in with dirty hands and curious eyes, the same way Jalen had once sat on a milk crate in that same spot taking apart a broken fan. One afternoon, about a year after the shed opened, a small boy appeared at the door. He was maybe 8 or 9 years old. His clothes were patched and dusty. His shoes were too big for his feet. His fingers were stained with something dark. Mud, maybe. Or grease. He stood at the doorway and looked inside with wide eyes. He looked at the tools, the workbenches, the diagrams on the walls. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said. His voice was quiet but clear. "Can you teach me how to fix things?" Jalen looked at the boy, and for a moment he was not standing in the shed anymore. He was standing on a dirt road in the summer heat, 13 years old, holding a cloth pouch with $2 worth of parts, looking up at a man in an expensive shirt who had just asked to see his workshop. Jalen smiled. "Come on in," he said. "Let me show you something." From the doorway, Wendell Hayes watched. He had driven down from New York for the week. He stood leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and he watched Jalen guide the boy to a workbench and put a screwdriver in his hand. Wendell thought about that afternoon 9 years ago. The dirt road, the dead engine, the boy with the grease-stained fingers who had fixed his car and refused $500. He thought about Opal on the porch with her arms crossed. He thought about the pump that saved the village. He thought about the science fair, the hospital room, the graduation. He had invested in hundreds of companies in his career. Startups, factories, research labs, deals worth millions, deals worth billions. But the best investment he ever made cost him nothing. It just required him to stop his car, step out into the heat, and listen to a boy that the rest of the world had overlooked. Later that evening, Jalen and Wendell sat on the porch of the old house. Opal was inside resting. The sun was going down slow the way it always did in Tillman, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Any regrets?" Wendell asked. Jalen was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the yard, at the shed, at the dirt road that stretched out into the fading light. "Just one," Jalen said softly. "I wish my mom could see this." Wendell placed his hand on Jalen's shoulder. Firm. Steady. The hand of someone who had become more than a mentor. More than a sponsor. Something closer to family. "She can," Wendell said quietly. "She can." They sat there in the warm evening air as the last light faded from the sky. 2 people from different worlds who had found each other on a broken road. And in the silence, the cicadas began to sing. Sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest changes. Jalen did not fix Wendell's car that day expecting anything in return. He did it because his grandmother had taught him that helping someone who is stuck is not a transaction. It is just the right thing to do. And in that one act, In those 8 minutes on a dirt road with $2 worth of parts, he planted a seed that would grow into something neither of them could have imagined. Talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. The next great engineer, the next great inventor, the next person who could change the world might be sitting right now in a shed, a garage, a back room, or a village that no one visits, waiting, not for money, not for charity, just for someone to stop, look, and listen. The $2 that fixed Wendell's car did not change his life. It was the boy behind the $2. It was Jalen's mind, his heart, his refusal to accept that poverty meant he had nothing to offer. Never judge a person's value by their circumstances, because the person the world overlooks today might be the one who saves it tomorrow. Now, I want to be honest with you. This story is fictional. Jalen and Wendell are not real people. I made them up. But the situation they are in is very real. Right now, as you are listening to this, there are millions of children in rural America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South America, who have the talent to change the world. They have the brains, they have the hunger, they have the hands. But no one is looking. No one is stopping. No one is listening. I created this story because I believe in one simple thing. Every child deserves a chance. Not every child will get one. But if this story makes even one person look twice at a kid that others have written off, if it makes one teacher stay after class, one stranger offer a ride to the library, one business owner open a door instead of closing it, then it was worth telling. That is why I make these videos. Not because the stories are real, but because the message behind them is. So tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone whose talent surprised you? Someone the world had overlooked, someone who fixed something, built something, knew something that they had no business knowing. I would love to hear your stories, the real ones. And if you know a young person who needs to hear this, someone who feels invisible, someone who thinks their talent does not matter because they do not have the right school or the right zip code, share this video with them. Sometimes a story is all it takes to remind someone that they matter. If you are new here, please subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell. There is another powerful story coming very soon, and I do not want you to miss it. And remember this: the biggest investments are not made with money. They are made with attention, with time, with the simple decision to stop, look, and listen. God bless you all, and may you always have the eyes to see the genius that others miss.